Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my final review of the new Samyang XP, or in this case, it's a Rokinon branded Rokinon SP 85mm f1.2 lens. So I've already taken a look in previous episodes at the overall build quality from the lens, as well as its kind of design and specifications, and so I'd encourage you to take a quick look at that episode if you haven't already, and get up to speed at this very new, highly improved build quality of this lens. If you have been familiar at all with any Samyang/Rokinon lenses in the past, you know that they have occupied typically the lower end of the spectrum in terms of price and in some ways in terms of build. Not that there was anything necessarily wrong with the build, but occupying kind of the manual focus only place, they have been, kind of the poor cousin to Zeiss lens or lenses like that. In Europe, the Samyang line comes under the designation XP, and under the Rokinon, it comes under the designation SP, or Special Performance. I do wish that they had stuck with the XP designator for both brands, since Tamron for a long time has already used the SP designator, but obviously that was a branding choice that they made. According to their marketing literature, these premium lines have been designed both to handle the rigors of 50 megapixel sensor bodies, and so for high resolution bodies, and then on the video end designed to stand up to the rigors of 8K recording. And so obviously from their positioning of these lenses, they are positioning them as being very high resolution lenses. Now, in terms of the overall build, I'm not going to rehash all of that. Suffice it to say that this is a huge departure from previous lenses. Instead of engineered plastics, it is all aluminum design. The lens hood is designed very much like the Zeiss Otis and Milvus line. It's designed to be part of the overall profile of the lens, and so it is a much more premium product than anything that you've seen before. And when it comes to the actual action, the focus action is pretty much perfect. In fact, I actually prefer the handling of this lens to the Zeiss Milvus 85mm f1.4, and that's because with the Milvus 85mm, I found that the focus action was a little bit stiffer than what I've noted on other Otis or Milvus lenses. But this is really perfectly damped, and so that it really allows you just that kind of perfect amount of resistance to allow you to fine-tune focus, but not having to, kind of have to really tweak it to get at it. Another big departure for this lens compared to earlier lenses is that I've reviewed something like 8 previous Samyang or Rokinon lenses, all of them manual focus, of course, but none of the ones that I have reviewed for various Canon mounts have had any kind of electronics built in them at all. Now, they have made a few lenses for Nikon that have had what they call an AE chip that basically just transmits a little bit of information, and it allows you to maybe meter a little bit better on Nikon bodies. But always before, there's been some quirks when it comes to particularly live view, because there's no electronic communication, and so the camera really has no way of recognizing that there's even a lens attached. And so none of the EXIF data is transmitted that would tell you what the lens is and its focal length or its aperture value, which has really been kind of a pain, particularly for a reviewer like me, and that I'm often trying to report back to you what various aperture values were when taking shots. And so I had to either separately record that information or guess at it. And so in this lens, they have designed this to function basically, if you're familiar at all with the way that a Zeiss lens operates on a Canon body, you know how this lens operates right down to a T. It has a electronically controlled aperture, and so the advantage there is that you can choose 1/3 stops You know, for example, going from f2.8 to f4, you have f3.2, f3.5, and then f4, whereas with that manual aperture ring, you would just usually go from just f2.8 all the way to f4 with nothing in between. So it gives you a little bit more versatility in controlling the aperture, and of course beyond that, it means that it solves all of the metering functions, because like any autofocus lens, the camera is actually able to go ahead and meter with the lens wide open, because it can set that aperture value, and then you know, you're free to just set whatever aperture you want for the actual shot. And so even in live view, it meters perfectly. And then on top of that, of course, you do get XF data transmitted to the camera, which is a big deal. There is one quirk there, however, and that is that for whatever reason, both cameras and software recognize the lens as the Canon 85mm f1.2L Mark II. And so that's a quirk. I don't know if it'll be solved or not, but it's just something to be aware of. It does have, as a part of that, it has a focus confirmation chip built into it. So that means that when the camera detects that things are in focus, it will light up the appropriate focus point and give you a beep confirming confirmation. Just know that this isn't always perfectly precise. It certainly is a help, and particularly if you don't have any way of visually confirming with, you know, the focus screen in a typical body. And that's the reason why I shoot a lot of my manual focus lenses with a precision matte focus screen in a Canon 6D body. And it's just much easier to visually confirm focus because it shows true depth of field. And so that helps, and focus confirmation does help, but it's not always going to give you 100% reliable focus results. And so you're left, of course, dealing with, you know, to make sure you have everything focused properly. Sometimes, you know, reverting back to live view and magnifying the image to do that. So unfortunately, this is designed only for Canon EF mounts, this lens, at least so far, and there really aren't any Canon bodies that are fantastic for shooting with manual focus lenses. Very little thought is given to manual focus aids at all in Canon bodies. That's an unfortunate reality. And the other thing that is a bit of a negative when it comes to the build is that, like other recent 85mm lenses, the Zeiss Otis, and then more recently the Sigma 85 Art, it has an 86mm front filter thread. 86mm filters, not all that common. They are quite expensive. So if you're looking for a good circular polarizer or ND filter, you're often looking, you know, close to $200 or more. And so, you know, that's a bit of a challenge, particularly when you consider within a lens that has a maximum aperture of f1.2, there certainly will be situations where you want to limit the amount of light that allows you to keep that shutter speed down while still retaining the shallow depth of field from very wide apertures. So that's just something to consider as a part of the price point with all of that. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I've been quite happy with the Tamron 85 f1.8 VC. Obviously, it doesn't have nearly as wide an aperture, maximum aperture, as this lens. However, I found it to be very versatile, and it's certainly nice that it has a 67mm front filter thread, which is shared with a lot of lenses. And you know, it's been nice in that sense. Now, if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to take a look at this detailed optical breakdown review of the optics and the bokeh, because it'll allow you to see things in much greater detail and with much more examples than what I'm able to give you here. So I'll just give you a quick overview. In my test, this is a very sharp lens, but it's not as sharp at wide apertures as the Sigma Art 85mm or as the Zeiss, Milvus or Otis 85mm lenses, and not even as sharp as the Tamron 85mm, which is all of the ones I just mentioned are extremely sharp lenses. However, it is a very sharp lens, and it gives quite an impressive performance at f1.2. In that, if you've ever used lenses with a maximum aperture of f1.2, and I've even shot some with the Canon 50mm f1.0, and this is let's just say a completely different reality when it comes to contrast at wide apertures, sharpness, and not just in the middle but extending out towards the edges. It's not perfect at the edges, but it's quite good. And so bottom line is that I consider f1.2 to be perfectly useful here, and even wide open chromatic aberrations are fairly well controlled. Contrast is quite good, so it will give you a good image that will be easy to process well. And in that sense, I think it actually will give, in terms of the optics, gives you quite an advantage over what I consider to be perhaps a more natural competitor, and that is the Canon 85L Mark II, in that, like that lens, you have that massive f1.2 aperture and the unique opportunities that that affords. In terms of making backgrounds blur away, this lens is pretty fantastic and basically unparalleled at an 85 millimeter focal length, and it will render a softer background than any of the f1.4 options, and that's actually particularly true of the Sigma 85 Art, in that it's a little bit shy of 85 millimeters, and in basically all tests you will find that it doesn't quite render the background as defocused as other 85 millimeter f1.4 lenses because of a few factors here. I found that even at equivalent apertures to, I tested directly against the Tamron, that even at the exact same distance away from the subject and the exact same aperture, the background was still softer coming out of this lens than it was with the Tamron for whatever reason. And so it is just, my point is that this delivers the nicest bokeh I think that I've probably seen from an 85 millimeter lens. It really is quite exceptional. The overall rendering is very, very good. So I think that there probably are some blessings and curses that come with engineering for an f1.2 aperture. I think that, you know, going for that bit wider an aperture, and of course that gives them a marketing foothold and an advantage over the f1.4 variants, but it also means that probably the engineering to accommodate for that extra 1/3 of stop of light, which is it's a bigger deal than what you think. It means that something had to give, and I think that it didn't allow for as absolute pin sharpness on the edges as what, say, the Sigma 85 Art did. The trade-off is that this is a bokeh monster in that sense. It blows away, I think, the other 85 millimeter lenses that it competes with in terms of the softness of the background. And of course, if you compare it to, you know, the only f1.2 competitor in sharpness, it blows away the Canon 85L Mark II. So in terms of optical strengths, it has good contrast, it has great bokeh, as I mentioned. CA is really well controlled. I didn't note any field distortion, and that's not typically a big deal with 85 millimeter lenses anyway. And of course, overall, it's the rendering. It's really great in the studio. It really handles skin tones and light fall off very, very nicely. And so it does produce beautiful results there. In terms of the weaknesses, there are sharper 85 millimeter options, most notably the new Sigma Art, which of course has autofocus as well. And so if you are all about having the sharpest lens out there, the Sigma is a better option. However, if you are more about overall rendering and you care a lot about the overall, that kind of undefinable look of images, I think that this is well worth consideration and looking at, because its rendering really is quite exceptional. So the price of $999 is of course high for a typical Samyang lens. And but at the same time, this is not an easy or inexpensive lens to manufacture. It's got a massive amount of glass with some very expensive elements in there. It has a build quality that is just far and away beyond anything that you've ever seen on a Samyang or Rokinon lens before. It really is Zeiss level of build. It's quite exquisite. And the one thing that the build lacks is weather sealing, and that's one advantage that the Milvus line has over this lens. But beyond that, when you compare it, price-wise to some of its competition, really the biggest question mark is going to be against the Sigma 85 millimeter Art, which is a sharper lens overall, has a very nice build, not quite at this level, but it's nice, and of course it has autofocus, and it's only $200 more. However, when you start to look at the Zeiss Milvus 85 millimeter, or you look at the Canon 85L Mark II, it certainly is a pretty huge savings over those lenses, coming at it pretty close to half price of them. So I think that really the biggest deterrent is not going to be the price, and it's not going to be the performance of the lens. It really does very well. It's flare prone, and I demonstrated that in the other episode, but beyond that, optically it's really a very sound lens. But it is manual focus only, and while the various handling aids that come with the electronic aperture and electronic communication, all of those things help in terms of the handling, but many people are not fantastic at manually focusing. And so just know that if you purchase this lens, you're going to have to be a little bit more deliberate about how you shoot, and also to have an expectation that you're going to have a lower keeper rate than you would with a well-calibrated autofocusing lens. And so if you're willing to kind of deal with that, and you really want a beautifully rendering lens, I think that this is a great option for you. You can find my full written review, a link to that down in the description section below, along with an image gallery that's got all kinds of images that I've taken with the lens over the last several weeks. And of course, you can find links to purchase it or follow me on social media. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.